Uh, It gives me great pleasure to introduce our presenter today. John Kleinheksel is a Holland, Michigan native. He is a product of Holland Public Schools and a self-described child of the Maplewood Reformed Church. I asked John for details about his life, and he was predictably modest, but I'm going to tell you as much as he gave to me. He is a graduate of Hope College. He started at New Brunswick Theological Seminary in New Jersey, but transferred to Western Seminary for the last 2 years of his MDiv program. He describes himself as a retired pastor, educator, author, and musician, and we share 3 of those 4. No one has ever thought of me as a musician, so I'm impressed. His book, Mortals and Mystery, Metaphors of Meaning for the Journey, is available from Amazon. John is married to Sharon. Together, they have 3 adult children, 7 grands, and no greats. And it sounds like there's an expectation there that I hope that happens. John returned to his hometown of Holland in 2003, and they are now living together with 65 friends at Warm Friend. Welcome, John.
Thank you. And welcome to all of you here and also online. The reason I'm asking you to hold your questions until the end is I think as I present in the early going, some questions will pop into your mind. And I hope that I'll be able to address them as we go along. For example, if you're opposed to war, what about Hitler? You know, that's a pretty good question. And I think that A.J. Muste would want to address that, and I would want to address it. So let's proceed. I ask you to really give me the benefit of the doubt. I have been converted to A.J. Muste's point of view because it goes along with the way my life trajectory has unfolded over the years. But I know that he is infamous. People are questioning whether A.J. Muste is really a good representative of the Hope College community. He was really very radical for his time. And even now, with our flirting with warfare, according to our ways of conducting it, he was not a very popular figure. I've got to be careful of digressing here now, because I've got a lot of material. But just yesterday, I read that Phil Donahue, who was one of the people who was giving the news, was removed from his position for criticizing the Iraqi war. And his comment as he reflected on it was, being anti-war is not a popular position. It's not patriotic to be against war. And besides that, it's bad for business. So with that as a kind of there are 4 or 5 things I want to do. The first is to give the scriptural and the religious origins of his stance, and we'll take time with each one of these. A brief reference to my own journey as an anti-war activist, a biblical case for an anti-militarism stance. I'll list some lessons to learn from this overview to the modern day. We as you well know, we are living in a warring global society. The media are lifting up fearfully that we are on the verge of all-out war in the Middle East. Media is really wanting to lift that up to the global community. And the United States is desperately trying to tamp it down. Israelis, please behave yourself. Palestinian Arabs, please stop pushing back against the oppression of the Israelis. Please, for the sake of the global community, we don't want to be dragged into an all-out war with the Iranians and us and our Israeli allies. So that's the backdrop for my lecture today, and I think it's relevant, and I'm glad you're here. I want to assess the just war theory that we've supported, especially since 1945, and suggest what A.J., and his full name was Abraham Johannes. He was a Dutchman, immigrated here, as I'll say, from Zierikzee in the Netherlands in the 1880s. Okay, number one, his journey into being an anti-war advocate. 1 year into World War I, he became what he calls a convinced pacifist. How did that happen? Well, here's what he said in his book, and I'm really dependent a lot for my research on Nat Henthoff's The Essays of A.J. Muste. It's available in the Hope College Library, and it was written a number of years ago. The problem was that I could not evade, because I had been brought up to take religion, especially biblical religion, and the gospel ethic seriously. From 1915 onward, he sought to conform to what he calls the demand of the gospel, because we belong to the family of man. So he actually progressed from being a Christian anti-war activist to his basis was all of humanity. Humanity really demands that we live differently. The temptation to adapt the gospel demand to circumstances and to abandon the hard effort to mold one's own life and the world to that imperious demand is no less subtle and pervasive. That's the way he justified his point of view. So my own journey, briefly, during my first and only year at New Brunswick, I wrote a term paper on the early Christian attitude to war, John Cecil Cadeau's book by that title. And what I learned through that research has shaped me ever since. I've not been consistent. I've not been faithful to it, but it's always been part of who I am and how I look at the world and Christianity. I learned that there was no record of Christians fighting in any of Caesar's wars, nor of any Christians fighting with the Jews against Caesar's domination, especially in that big warfare between 66 and 70 AD, when the temple was destroyed and the city was destroyed. History shows that there were no Christians part of that battle. From the time in 312, before the, well, that shouldn't be before the Common Era, that should be in the Common Era. From the time of 312, when Constantine had a vision of the cross and adopted it in his campaign against Maxentius, Christians rejoiced in their newfound acceptance by Rome. Once Constantine became Caesar, Christians acquiesced in fighting his earthly battles. That's when it started. It's okay to be at war. We have to preserve our Christian identity, and we're part of the Roman society, and with God's help, we're going to preserve it against all the enemies that want to fight against Roman peace. During this early period in my life and ministry that I thought seriously becoming a pre-Constantinian follower of our Lord. And I've confirmed that conviction during the last 15 years. So my anti-war stance was tested during the turbulent 1960s. Many of you remember the 1960s, which were even more turbulent than the divisiveness of today's division in the view of many. President Johnson gradually built up U.S. forces to fight communism in Southeast Asia. I was, as many of my contemporaries, ambivalent. I was a pastor in South Haven in 63 to 69, thinking there may have been a case to be made for that war, only later to realize how wrong I was and even cowardly not to oppose it more openly. Okay? I want to say a little bit about the Bible. My view is that the Bible is the written record of life's participants in dialogue with God, seeking to know and follow God's. And I put it in parentheses because the term God is very problematic to a lot of contemporary people. What do you mean by God? Who is God? So specific persons, Moses, Samuel, etc., were laid hold of or encountered by someone or something beyond. They were called upon to move themselves and others in new directions with new insights and fresh energies. In each epoch, I maintain this someone is understood to be both in continuity with the God of Abraham and in discontinuity with the era that was now being transcended. This has led some Bible commentaries to speak of the progressive nature of revelation. At a very young age, my godly dad, Henry, exposed me to Albertus Peter's book, The Facts and Mysteries of the Christian Faith, in which he argued that God's revelation of God's self was progressive. That is, becoming clearer through different eras. Now I want to go to the third major point that I outlined and make a case, a biblical case for nonviolent resistance to military war. Okay? I've got about 5 steps, and I'm going to go into some detail on each one of these. The pre-monarchy period, the monarchy period, the post-monarchy period, where the prophets denounced dependence on militarism, envision a kingdom of, quote, shalom. Then the Gospels, where the evangelists declare the coming of this kingdom of peace and justice in Jesus of Nazareth. Finally, the apostles, stage number 5, argue that true warfare is not militaristic. It is spiritual, not worldly. Worldly by that meaning in conquest by empire. Quickly, the pre-monarchy period. Moses perceived that God was helping them fight and win against earthly enemies. No separation between spiritual and worldly, all of one piece. Moses could sing at the Exodus, "The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name." And paraphrasing, we're underdogs. We were underdogs. God freed us from our overlords. This is military, social, political, spiritual victory. The people of God and God are totally merged, which is a modern template for totalitarians and nationalists. America first. God is with us. So during the second period then is the monarchy, which embodied this victorious stance in the world of other nations. During King Saul's kingship, Saul gave his oldest daughter Miriam to David with the stipulation that he be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles against those Philistine hordes. So he was a man of war par excellence. He built the kingdom through bloodshed. He could sing in Psalm 144, "Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war." And when he says war, he means war. He means military war, killing the enemy, bloodshed, annihilating those who are opposed to the Lord's chosen people. So although there was a complete emphasis on physical dominance over the enemy, there began, friends, to be clear misgivings about the shedding of human blood or violence, somehow being unworthy of our God. Ooh. Misgivings about military warfare. Where did that come from? The prophets. The prophets. The post-monarchy, the prophets denounce dependence on militarism and envision a kingdom of peace apart from militarism. The excesses of empire become a stench in the nostrils of God, according to the major and minor prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Jeremiah. Reliance on armies, armaments, and alliances can be no substitute for trust in God and humility, justice, and mercy in the private and public sector. In a rewrite of the law, Moses says, "You may indeed set as a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose, only he must not multiply horses for himself or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to multiply horses." Deuteronomy was probably finalized, very close to the exile period, when Israel was really fulfilling God's promise that if you don't follow in my ways, you'll be separated from your country, be lost, wandering under the control of other people. So the prophets continued to envision this kingdom. As the exile deepens and hope wanes, the prophets envision the establishment of a kingdom of shalom, where nations shall no longer resort to warfare to put themselves on top of the world. Ooh, oh my, oh my. You mean there will be nations who no longer resort to being number one, but we wanting to be part of a consortium of nations that are working to help the underprivileged, the marginalized, the oppressed, instead of wanting to put themselves first? This kingdom will be of God, with God's servant leadership very much in evidence. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation. Oh, wow, how could that possibly be? This was the question that the disciples of Jesus kept putting in his face. How can you be the Messiah if you're not willing to put your sword against the Romans? How can this be? The unique fashion, Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John announced that it is Jesus, Son of David, who ushers in right then and there. Now is the time. The kingdom is at hand. Repent and believe, trust in, live out the good news of God's love for everyone. Born of the Spirit, anointed with God's Spirit in his baptism by John, announcing to Israel and the world he's the one sent of God's Spirit to inaugurate this promised prophetic kingdom of peace. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me, quoting Isaiah 61, 1-4, to bring good news to who? The poor, release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, letting the oppressed go free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Oh, Jesus, what a claim. So the apostles now pick up that Spirit of Jesus, realizing that he has come, taught us God's way, parables, Sermon on the Mount, and that the true warfare is spiritual, not conquest by the church, by the disciples. Following the Spirit of Jesus, the apostles and the New Testament writers emphasize that our warfare is not earthly with human weapons, but spiritual, against the forces of the evil one at work in my heart and your heart and throughout the world. Not human weapons, but spiritual. Peter, Paul, James, and John, each, I maintain, build upon this understanding of the real war that God helps us win. Now, I think in some ways it's like the Muslims who insist that really jihad is what's going on in the human heart. And of course, we want to say, no, what you really mean is jihad is that you're willing to exterminate your enemies. That's the jihad that we're afraid of. And the mystics, those who are deeply into the Muslim religion are saying, no, the true jihad is the struggle that Allah is is waging in each human heart to keep us from violence, to keep us from hatred, to keep us from extremism. That's my view of a really true modern Muslim, by the way. Our true adversary, writes Peter, is the devil, who inspired Peter to rebuke Jesus when Jesus said his lordship would come through suffering, not military might. Get behind me, Satan. Follow me. Follow me, Peter. Don't follow Satan, who's trying to influence you in a different direction that's earthly and not heavenly. So we live as human beings, but do not wage war according to human standards. But the weapons of our warfare are not merely human. This is 2 Corinthians 10 now, a very important verse for us anti-war activists. The weapons of our warfare are not merely human, but they have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every proud obstacle raised up against the knowledge of God. We take every thought captive to obey Jesus, the Christ. So this is my overview of the stages of God's progressive revelation about the true meaning of warfare. The true meaning of warfare started stage 1 against our physical enemies, destroy them. Some misgivings about it, and on to true warfare is opposed to the maliciousness in my heart, promiscuity, gossip, lust, lack of self-control, all of the things that the Spirit wants to work in me. So I'm going to suggest some things before we get on to AJ's point of view. I'm going to let you do some reading instead of me. I'm not going to read all this. Take some time to read it. Now, this is very important for me to say because I think it can counter what you are wanting to object to my point of view. Both Peter and Paul can write that the state does have a right to exist. The state has the right of the sword. I'm not going to object to that. I don't think AJ was wanting to object to it either. The state has a right to exist and calls for Christians to be submissive to the state. Romans 13, 1 Peter 2. Peter argues that governors are sent by God to punish those who do wrong and to praise those who do right. So that's operative in this world of Christians who are against war. Thus, Jesus acknowledged that the world's kingdom does have a certain jurisdiction. You feel a little bit better about my position now, I hope. Yeah, the state does have a certain jurisdiction, and we have to respect it. Jesus himself did not resist his death at the hands of the Romans. He was not happy about it. He admitted that wars and rumors of war will be part of each world order, as has been happening in the 2,000 years since his death, resurrection, ascension to God's side. Clearly recognizes the existence of earthly control power, as in this passage from John 19:10. Pilate, don't you know I have the power to release you or to crucify you? Jesus, according to John, answers him, you would have no power over me unless it had been given to you from above. The implication of that is that earthly nations are accountable for how they act. They're accountable to God because God is the ultimate sovereign, ultimate authority in human affairs. So here's a couple of other things. According to Jesus, his true followers will take up not the sword, but their cross daily and walk through life as he did. The sword that he brings is not literal, but figurative. It's the word of love and justice that comes from his mouth. Division comes among people who want to fight for their lives as the world does, and those willing to lose their lives for the sake of faithfulness to him and his way. My own view is that being a follower of Jesus, of the four gospel accounts, means relativizing empire rules and working for the betterment of the poor and the marginalized, the sick and the suffering. Renouncing military war as a solution, Christians will support. Well, I've got to give you an illustration. It just came to me this morning. A woman was talking about the prison ministry at Muskegon Correctional, Hope and Western Seminary. When they first started that program, they were forbidden to look into the eyes of the convict or to shake their hand, against rules and regulations. They've since had that rescinded. But imagine the rules in the prisons. Keep them dehumanized. They're scum. They're worth nothing. And the whole environment now that is being brought into the Muskegon Correction changes everything. They went against empire rules. Oh, how dare you do that? They did, and now there's been a change. There's been a change. They can look into the eyes of the convicts. And when they come in, they can shake their hands and call them by name. That's kingdom ethic. I wish that could happen in Israel, Palestine. The Arab Palestinians would be able to look an Israeli in the eye and say, I really care about you. I respect you. I think I understand your narrative. And for Israelis to do that with Palestinian Arabs, you are human. You mean I have to respect you as a fellow human being? No, no, no. Can't do that. You've been too bad. Bad to us. Bad. Friends, please pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Well, now here's a kind of sidebar. Joe Biden, a couple of months ago, there's no place for political violence or violence of any kind. Woo! Joe, how dare you say that when we support the violence in Gaza and the Ukraine? Rather than more consistently following Jesus' nonviolent resistance to empire's wars, the U.S. Christians seem to have arrived at what I declare to be a deadly compromise. The consensus, friends, is this. Correct me if I'm wrong. American Christians will support U.S. military wars if they help preserve our constitutional democracy and that of other friendly nations with the United States as the head of the pack. Those are the wars we will support. The mindset that we have is that we are gifted by God with global leadership of democracy. The free world is what we call it in the press, seeking to ensure that they with us remain free and friendly to our national interests. We pick the party to militarily support who best supports our brand of governance that crisscrosses the globe with hundreds of bases in every part of the globe. Thus, we're on a permanent war footing, ready to defend our interests and those of our friends. This behavior is compatible with the practice of Christianity, no questions asked. And I have the audacity to stand before you and say, we need to ask a question about that. We need to ask a question about that. We seem to justify this brand of warfare because we see ourselves as helping the underdog, minimizing how we became top dog through militarism and the violence of Dresden and Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Adopting the ways of the world to be top dog above other nations. This idolatry is that we firmly believe that God of the scriptures, of Jesus, is on our side. This God has chosen us and the Israelis as God's favored, exceptional nations, at least for this era in history. The God of America is helping us win those literal wars. Phase one in the biblical scheme. Tell me I'm wrong in the question and answer. There are Judeo-Christian leaders who argue that the God of Jesus is completely merged with the God of America, who is working, after all, to preserve our nation. Oh, we don't think so much of the other nations of the world. That's their problem. We have a God who works to preserve our nation. That literal warfare is justified to maintain the United States as the leader of the so-called free world. It's called Christian nationalism. And free, in this case, means free for us to control and nobody else. Can we break this cycle? That's my question. Must we always be at war? I believe that AJ would have a proposal that would break this cycle. Well, we're halfway into it, and I'm finally getting to the main point of this lecture. What might AJ have advocated? Well, you need to know that in 1950, he said pacifists, and by that was the term then, pacifism. What we really now understand pacifism to be is active, nonviolent resistance to warfare. Active, nonviolent resistance to the rules of warfare promulgated by empire, promulgated by those who want to go to military warfare. Active resistance against, and AJ consistently opposed to it. We should refuse any support to American military measures, withdraw from the power struggle, and adopt a policy of creative service to humankind. Wow. Creative service to humankind, not wanting to dominate them. In that same essay, 1950, advocacy of abandonment by the United States of the war method, the adoption of a nonviolent program, including racial equality at home and abroad, concentrated effort at raising the standard of living of the masses, especially in the so-called backward countries in the lands of our enemies. That, friends, is the spirit of Jesus. That's the spirit of Jesus right there. 15 years later, he felt the military buildup in Vietnam was untenable and indefensible. Always worked for an end to warfare as a means to redress wrong. He urged young men who opposed the Vietnam War to burn their draft cards. Well, that wasn't acceptable. When called to account for his beliefs and actions before a grand jury, he refused to cooperate. Dissent should be allowed, was his defense. I don't know if he got put in prison for that or not. Not sure of the outcome of that stance against empire. It was totally opposed to the effort in Vietnam. And a couple of books that I've read about Vietnam in the last 2 weeks have reinforced my notion that we were bombing villages in South Vietnam, exterminating people, women and children. I think the Israelis probably got it from us. Exterminating villages and the people in them because we were after the Viet Cong. My God, we're going to kill them. We're going to kill them. Here's a summary by Sanderson Beck. Was able to help bring together a broad-based coalition of groups to protest, establish a policy of refusing to accept the co-sponsorship of organization. 1965, over 50,000 people paraded down Fifth Avenue under his leadership. In this war, he suggested that the United States withdraw its forces and disarm young men facing conscription. He always recommended holy disobedience. He met with anti-war Buddhists, Catholic leaders in Saigon, met with Ho Chi Minh, 1967, just before he died, 17 days before he died, he met with Ho Chi Minh in Hanoi, much to the displeasure of American officialdom. Was honored in New York at the March of the Spring Mobilization to end the war in Vietnam. In these days, the crucial obstacle to peace is American self-righteousness, our feeling that we have never sought anything but peace, that our invention and building of a nuclear arsenal was in the interest of peace, and that it always was the others who are disturbers, aggressors, and troublemakers. That sound familiar? So he had the audacity to say we should disarm unilaterally. And the other great powers should do that too. Russia and China should take our lead and do it too. So my sense, friends, and here's where I come to the nuts and bolts of my lecture. AJ would urge us now, as he did in 1965, to disarm unilaterally, to stop being the world's leading arms merchant with the Israelis, the North Koreans, the Iranians, the Russians, and stop feeding the military-industrial complex. Now, I know, and I'm going to list some of the objections to that radical, politically incorrect point of view. The National Review, which is the offspring of William F. Buckley. Anybody ever heard of William Buckley? Yeah, earlier in my era, deceased for a long time. The National Review has continued to trumpet the America First point of view. They advocate for a strong and unassailable military-industrial capacity to deter war. Oh, in other words, keep the status quo where the United States is on top and all of the others are subservient to our way of control, governance, and so that we can maintain our luxurious lifestyle and the rest of the world can go to you know where. A lot of people don't believe that, and the United States is doing so much to help other countries in the world. I applaud that, and I think we need to do more of it. That's the point that AJ is making. We need ships. We need aircraft. We need missiles. January of 24, page 22 and 23. Even David French, the evangelical Christian columnist for the Times, wrote recently, "We're still the arsenal of democracy. Ukraine doesn't even ask us to stand with it on the field of battle. It merely asks for that we place a sword in their hands, as he's doing right now at this moment with Biden and Harris in New York City at the UN. He's doing it right now, right this minute. We need the sword to help us against the Russian bear." For fiscal 23-24, the Defense Department has $886 billion to maintain our hegemony in global affairs and to support our veterans. $884 billion in 1 year. And I'm kind of thankful for that because I've got 2 grandkids in the Navy. Don't ask me why they're there, but they wanted to serve their country in the Navy. I'm going to go over this session, and I'm going to go over this Munther Isaac thing. I want to give you a chance for some questions and for us to discuss this. Munther Isaac preached a sermon last Christmas, and he concluded it with these words: "I was in the United States last month," meaning November of 23, first Monday after Thanksgiving, and I was amazed by the amount of Christian Christmas decorations and lights and all the commercial goods. And I couldn't help but think, they send us bombs while celebrating Christmas in their lands. They sing about the Prince of Peace in their land while playing the drum of war in our land." Oh, Munther. Oh, Munther. Doug, would you take I would like to have someone comment on and critique what Biden said 2 days ago, as listed in front of you right now. Someone want to give a critique of what Biden's proposing here? Okay. Perhaps Lloyd has, no, he's not, he doesn't have his hand up. Okay. My sense, friends, in critiquing this is that Biden is justifying the excesses of Israelis' military stance in Gaza and the West Bank by pointing, as Israel does, to October 7th. Israel is refusing, in my opinion, the opinion of many people in the globe today, many Jews there and here. Biden is misrepresenting the real issue, which is that as long as you lift up the grievances that Arabs have against Israelis and that Israelis have against Arabs, you're going to have perpetual warfare. As long as you keep emphasizing, you have hurt me, you have hurt me, you have hurt me, and I'm going to get back at you. You have hurt me, and I'm going to get back at you. That's the way it is. And until that dynamic changes, and we start seeing an enemy as a person that, what are their grievances? Why are they doing this? As we should have done more deeply with 9/11. We jumped to a conclusion, right? They hate us for our democratic ways. Oh, you mean there's more to it than that? There are grievances about American hegemony and American hypocrisy in the world, supporting wars and dictators who are for us, but ignoring the conditions that are producing warfare in other nations. Oh. Hamas did not start this war. That's what he says. They're going through hell and they started it. We put out a hostage and ceasefire deal. It's been endorsed by the United States Security Council, and Hamas doesn't want to accept it. How many times hasn't he put the blame on Hamas for not accepting what Israel has no intention of recognizing the humanity of the Arab Palestinians? None. They're terrorists. Every last one of them are terrorists. They hate us. Can't you see that October 7 is proof positive that they want to eliminate us? For no reason. No reason? For no reason? I wonder if that's true. I wonder if that's true about the olive orchards, the homes, the land, the economy, the children that are taken from their parents at 3 o'clock in the morning and put in military detention with no charges, keep them cowed and in hand so that they won't rebel against their overlords. No economy, everything has to go through the arms and the economy of the Israelis. We'll get to you in a minute. Right. So you know, you know that I'm a partisan for justice everywhere in the world. Speaking of Sudan's horrific civil war, Biden calls on outside nations to stop arming the warring parties. He said this 3 days ago, but he does not name names, which would mean calling out a close U.S. ally in the United Arab Emirates, UAE. So in other words, civil war is bad. It's okay for us to arm the Israelis who are fighting a defensive war, but for Russia to arm the Iranians or the Lebanese or the Syrians or others. That's wrong. That's wrong. And it's all because, you know, we want to maintain the status quo. We want to maintain it. I'm going to skip over this. You can read it if you wish. We can never stop supporting Israel, friends. Part of our project for maintaining control in the Middle East. If we would take AJ seriously and start dismantling 800 military bases, just as Israel was told by the ICJ recently to dismantle the dozens of illegal settlements on Palestinian territory, there would be people in the Senate who would scream bloody murder. No way. No way. You want to weaken the United States? We would need to agree to a shared global security architecture with China and Russia, rather than seek to bully and batter these great powers into submission with bloody proxy wars, such as the one in Israel and Ukraine. I respect Jonathan Cook very highly. He's a UK journalist, been living in Nazareth with his Palestinian wife for decades, been a great observer of what's been going on there for decades. I think he's got some great insight into what's really happening there. And what we need to do to enlist China and Russia in helping the world's impoverished people to a better way of life. Okay, I'm almost done. I think AJ, I won't put AJ in this, I will put myself in this. What the United States has been doing is finally unsustainable. Our society is broken. Now I'm sounding a little bit like a guy who's running for the Republican candidate now, I know that. Our society is broken, our fiscal affairs are dishonest and bankrupt. Leadership is mocked, derided, distrusted, and inept. And the American people fear an uncertain, warring, and chaotic future. Well, if that doesn't sound like Donald Trump, I don't know what does. Pardon me. I'm saying we need a rebirth of servant leadership, a new humility, a new humanity made alive and illumined by the Spirit of Jesus. I guess that's sectarianism, isn't it? I respect Muslims and Jews, Buddhists, Hindus. I'm suggesting that Jesus of Nazareth shows a way. Christians call it the way, not empire, and its insatiable appetite for luxury and war-bought control. We are truly voices from the wilderness. Who among our U.S. leadership is willing to give up national supremacy so we can gut the military-industrial complex, divert more resources to mending our own affairs, be fiscally more honest, and better help the impoverished and oppressed peoples in the emerging countries of the world? Where is that leadership coming from? Among our sons and daughters? Among our grandsons and granddaughters? I hope and pray that that's going to be the case. I garnered this statement from a good friend of ours in Kairos, West Michigan, Jonathan Katab. And I put this out here because there are a lot of people who think that the college campus protests are totally inspired by communists. and left-wing Marxists, and has nothing to do with justice for Palestinians that finally is catching on in the major American media. First time in 15 years, in my recollection. Finally, the modern media are starting to lift up the Palestinian narrative. We admire, he says, the sacrifice of the students at these schools, whose peaceful resistance to military-industrial complex, imperialism, and the slaughter of innocents is being met with all forms of retaliation, all forms of violence and brutal repression. They're facing it down, the protesters. They're pointing directly to our complicity in the bombing and the siege of Gaza and the maintenance of what is an apartheid state. It is weapons manufactured by American companies, paid for with American tax dollars, and in many cases developed with the assistance of the same universities these students are attending, that have killed thousands of children, permanently disfigured or made orphans of many more. These weapons and the siege and occupation that they maintain are killing Palestinian civilians and Israeli hostages alike. If there are lessons to be learned from October 7, among them must be that weapons are not making Jewish people anywhere safer. I wonder if that's true. Disarm the Palestinians? How realistic is that? No, but it is the Americans who have sway over there, or purportedly have sway. We're going to withhold weapons until you withhold your genocidal slaughter of these people. Biden doesn't have the courage to do that. Doesn't have the courage to do it. He's afraid. He's afraid. We weep for all those who have lost their homes, their limbs, their beloved ones, and their own lives. We declare that our hearts are big enough to feel sorrow and have empathy for Palestinians and Israelis. Yes, Israelis. No one should demonize Israelis. Zero tolerance for that. We also know that more violence will not solve anything. These protesting students are asking our government to stop killing and to feed the hungry. Bring humanitarian help into Gaza and the West Bank. I think that when AJ repeated the Buddhist axiom, there is no way to peace, peace is the way, he means that there is no universal to-do plan that leads to peace. All has to be targeted into the individual situation. What is required in Ukraine, for example, probably very different from what is being required in Gaza and the West Bank. His point of view is that he actively advocated against any specific war. His point of view was the Quaker Anabaptist Mennonite point. No war is going to solve anything. It's not going to solve anything. It's going to push under the rug issues that need to be addressed out in the open. Get them out in the open. Look at what the grievances are. Do Russians have genuine grievances against the Ukrainians? Do Ukrainians have genuine grievances against what Russia is doing in traditional Ukraine? Sit down and talk about those things. Warfare is not going to solve them. They need to be solved in speaking together, treating each other with respect. When you say you're worthy to be killed, where's the respect in that? Where's the respect in that? There's no respect. I love Edwin Markham's saying, he drew a circle that shut me out. Heretic. rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the width to win. We drew a circle that took him in. One day, when picketing the White House in opposition to the Vietnam War, a journalist asked AJ, "Why do you demonstrate in the rain? You think you will change the country this way?" "No," replied Muste. "I don't do this to change the country. I do this so the country doesn't change me." I love that quote. Okay, what are your comments, your questions? We've got a half hour to deal with this really contentious issue, and I'm glad to be in conversation with you about it.
Patricia online has a number of comments. I'll start with her first. Regarding Ukraine, would you be comfortable with Russia taking over the country? The Russians certainly would not follow the Christian gospel.
I think it is true to say that what Europe can do and the United States can do is to work with sanctions, is to work with the Russians and saying, you know, this way that you are trying to cow and destroy the Ukrainians and their sovereignty over their own country is not the way to go. We have some economic leverage, to the question asker. We have some leverage with the Russians. We always feel we do have some leverage with the Russians. And we, as is happening with the Biden administration, not so much the Europeans. I think the Europeans need to step up to their responsibility more, because it's more of a regional thing. As with Hitler, there were ways that the European community could have engaged Germany in its deep sense of grievance as to what was imposed upon them in the First World War. The West should have been, and now in Ukraine, Russia, should be more conversant with exactly why the Russians feel so deeply about the Ukrainian issue and all those hundreds of thousands of Russians in Ukraine. That they feel aggrieved over that. And there has to be a solution to that sooner rather than later. When we in this classroom a couple of months ago heard all of the young people from Ukraine and asking them, what do you see as an end game in Ukraine, Russia? Their point was, we need to, and we said this in the Second World War, we need to establish strength of our position militarily, so that when we come to the negotiating table, we will be from a position of strength and not a position of weakness. That makes a certain amount of sense, doesn't it? But in the meantime, hundreds of thousands of Russians have already been killed. You know that there are between 300 and 400,000 Russian soldiers that have been killed, to say nothing of the thousands and thousands of Ukrainian soldiers who've been taken away from their wives and children through death. When is it time for negotiation? After the carnage? And, oh, this is our base. This is our base. Can we come together and agree to sharing the sovereignty in Donetsk and some of these other eastern provinces in Ukraine? Can there be some shared sovereignty? Do you have to own and control everything that's going on? Or can there be some shared control over our Russian people in Ukraine? And can you in Russia accept the fact that we want to be our own country and not attached to the Russian Empire? Can you understand that? Can you accept it? Because if you can't, we can't talk to you. We want to talk to you. So that's a long answer to a very good question. But I don't think it's an either or situation. I don't think there's the camera over there. I think that, that's the extremism of our age. We like to think it's either or. It's either Russians completely dominate Ukraine and Ukraine goes down the drain, or Ukraine wins against Russia. You mean you're going to destroy Russia? Is that realistic to think that you can dominate Russia? How foolish and naive is that? But they feel as though they have to fight back against the opposition of the Russians who want to destroy us. Well, there are other ways of dealing with the issue than Russia crushing the Ukrainians. Go ahead, Lloyd.
About a year ago, I talked to a lady from the
Speak up now. You
I
speak up.
talked to a lady from the Ukraine at length. And I said, her mother is remaining in the Ukraine and supports Putin's thinking. Her father is living with her in Denver and had a heart operation here and decided, I'm going to stay here. That shows the conflict that exists. I said, well, what about religion? What about your church? She said, well, the Russian Orthodox Church and the Catholic and Christian churches in Ukraine, I mean, they are on opposite sides of this issue. The idea that if the Russians take over the Ukraine, that there won't be any religion there or Christianity there. I said, oh, are you a Christian? She said, no. She said, I can't follow a religion that basically looks at this issue, this conflict, this division. One Christian group says one thing and another Christian group says another thing. There's Christianity in both.
Lloyd, thank you for bringing that issue up. I want to speak to that.
That reflects the division in thinking in our country here in terms of Christianity. Can we agree as Christians on this or that?
Yeah.
We're divided.
Right.
Oh, and politically we're divided.
We surely are.
Yeah.
We surely are. I think that you have raised a wonderful issue. You're absolutely right. A guy named Cyril, K-I-R-I-L-L, is championing. He's the head of the Russian Orthodox Church in Russia. He is championing Putin's military efforts in Ukraine.
You can say that the church is under a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
But it's more than the political pressure. It's the people.
Well, so let me finish, Lloyd. Let me finish. The point is that there are Christians in Russia who are supporting Russia first with a lot of religious and God in favor of them. There are a lot of Ukrainian Catholics and Orthodox who are championing Zelensky and saying, our God happens to be Christian too. Oh, really? Is saying that the Ukrainian desire to be independent is surely of our God. And so what it does for young people, it shows the division of the Christian church. It behooves the Christians in Russia and Ukraine, the leadership, to get together and say, what is the will of our Maker, of our Lord Jesus of Nazareth? What would Jesus say that we need to do in Ukraine as Christians and in Russia as Christians to win over a peace that will satisfy the desires and wishes of the Russian nation and will satisfy the desires and perhaps legitimate wishes of the Ukrainian Christians. That's, friends, is the goal of the Christian church. Jesus said, don't fight one another. Be of the same mind and the same spirit. Love one another. Don't hate one another. Don't kill one another. Don't pit yourself against a brother or sister in the faith. So the Christian church has so much to do to regain the unity that Jesus asks of his followers. Love one another. Believe in me as the one who sets the agenda for you, and follow that, not the country that says, by God, we're going to kill those who are opposed to us. Is that the will of Jesus? Is that the wishes of our Lord? No, I say with the prophets of old, no. The goal of the church is to heal the broken, to give food to the hungry, to give health to the sick, sight to the blind, and find ways of doing it. And it's happening, friends, all over the world. I'm so glad that I'm a part of a church that is really making a difference in people's lives. But when it comes to warfare, we're not adequate. We're not up to it. We're falling back from what our Lord really wishes. Okay, next question or comment. Somebody, Lloyd, that was a really good point. And young people are saying, I don't want anything to do with the Christianity that's going to be compromised and is going to pit me against somebody else. Yeah.
When October 7th happened,
Yes.
I remember just personally having this overwhelming feeling that Israel had to do something, but I was so hoping they would find some way to give a message to the rest of the world about Israel. You know, I was hoping they would find some other way than killing tens of thousands of people. And I'm wondering if in all this philosophical talk, because I couldn't think of what they could do, but I just thought they had a real opportunity to make a statement about Israel and about why we should support them as a country. But that's kind of gone now.
Didn't they ask for the world's support in going against people who want to destroy them? Didn't they ask for help? And the United States said, we'll help you. You have a right to defend yourself. And that's pretty basic in American, that's pretty basic in American foreign policy, that we will ensure the military superiority of our friends, the Israelis. But what they have done is, in my view, the Israelis have used October 7th as an opportunity to impose even more draconian actions on their Palestinian neighbors than ever before. And they have done some pretty bad stuff before. And now they have reason to believe that the only safety that they will have is in the death of every one of those terrorists. Get rid of them. And so there are people who are pushing back against that in Israel. Hundreds of thousands before October 7 were ready to get rid of Bibi, because he's not really showing the face of true Judaism. His is Israel first and me first. And if you get in the way of that, you're the enemy. So now Palestinians and his fellow Jews, some of who want to have a more forward-looking perspective of Judaism. No, you're the enemy. You've got to go along with what I'm saying. And we're going to get rid of all of Hamas people. We're going to get rid of all those Hezbollah people, all of those Houthis. We are going to be on a war footing from now until it takes to establish the legitimacy and the future of Israel.
That's what they did, but what might they have done?
What might they have done?
To give the world a different message about Judaism and Israel. I mean, they've had a lot of support over the decades.
Yeah.
And I was so hoping they would do something. I don't know what it could be. They had to.
You don't have
retaliate.
any suggestions for them?
I don't. Do you?
Okay, yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
when you develop this whole thing philosophically and you ask people to look at the deeper meanings of stuff.
Yeah.
But what they did is turning people away from them instead of being more supportive.
Well, I
They had a
think
chance to
it's what I,
rise head and shoulders.
well,
above
I
the
really
world.
thank you for that comment because it's really what I suggested in illustrating what happens in American prison system. Is when you treat the people who are in your prison in a dehumanizing, demonic way, you have earned your retribution. And by God, we are going to make you feel it. And don't you ever forget it. If the Israelis, and I'm pointing at the United States citizenry as well, if we can treat an African American or some other oppressed minority with human respect, I'm going to look you in the eye and accept you as God's child. You're created in the image of God. You deserve to be treated with respect. If the Israelis could only, and if Arab Palestinians could only look at an Israeli and say, you know, I'm understanding your narrative. You were killed in Europe. For 2,000 years, you didn't have your own homeland. You were praying for your own homeland. If Arab Palestinians would only get that in their head and their heart, that Israelis are human beings and that they have a desire for their own country. And they desperately desire it, and they don't feel they're safe in their own country. So Israelis have to give the benefit of the doubt to Arabs. There's 60% of Palestinian Arabs want to have an accommodation with the Israelis, 60%. And yet the extremists, the Hamas people, say, no, by God, we're going to take it to you. You've hurt and crushed. You've taken away my grandparents' home in these little villages along the Gaza Strip. By God, we're going to get back at you. That's the spirit that has to be countered, in my view. And not just my view, the view of many, many, many others. So it's this attitude of, I know better than you. My point of view is more righteous. It's more true than your point of view. And so we have this division in our own country. The people who are championing Harris and her point of view, the people who are championing Trump and his point of view. And now we are so divided in our country, I sense it. And yet there's such a revulsion by most of us in this room and in this city. We hate division. Don't call us polarized. We want to be open to everyone. But the spirit is now so endemic, it's so deep rooted that if you are for this person, you are an enemy. You are an enemy. So I don't know how it's going to be resolved, friends. I do not know how it's going to be resolved. But I know that if the spirit of vengefulness in Ukraine, Russia, and Gaza, Israel is not assuaged, ameliorated, softened in hearts and minds, there will be another all-out war like we had in the Second World War. There was people who were saying, this is it. You've invaded Poland. We're going to go to war against you. Instead of taking the positions of there's other ways of dealing with it and not letting it go this far. Yes.
Patricia
another.
asks about a two-state solution. Would that address the grievances and offer dignity to both sides in Israel-Palestine?
Say that again, because it sounds right to me.
She asked about a two-state solution, which would address grievances and offer dignity to both sides.
Right. The one state, two state discussion is basically treated by those of us who've been students there for many, many years as irrelevant. The real solution is recognizing the legitimacy and the validity of the other person's point of view. Now, I have many Palestinian friends who realize that the two-state solution is a concoction by the UN from 1947, 48. That's the way the global community wanted to resolve it. And it's been the official American position for decades. It's the only way to do it. Palestinians have their right to existence in their state alongside of a secure Israel that has the right to their state. That's the official global position. Guess what? Arab extremists do not want it. And the extremists in the Israeli government right now do not want it. They don't want it. Arab extremists want their own country. What are you Israelis doing here? You're a creation of European colonialism. You don't belong here, except as members of a pluralistic state, which Yasser Arafat promulgated as early as 1955. Guess what? Israel doesn't want a two-state. They want to have their own state, just like Arab extremists want to have their own state. But there is still, friends, I'll tell you this, my friend Sam Bahur, who's a Arab Palestinian businessman from Youngstown, Ohio, and went back during the Oslo euphoria years, 1994, 95. Still yearns in his own heart for a Palestinian state. He still does. He wants them to be recognized as a legitimate entity in the history, in the community of nations that make up the United Nations. Guess what? Israel says, no, you cannot be admitted into the community of nations. All you want to do is destroy us. We can't trust you. We can't talk to anybody there. We can't give you a state, because if we gave you an autonomous state, you'd want to kill us. There's no point in giving you autonomy. You can't do it. We don't trust you. We don't trust you. So that's two-state, one state. Yeah, it's probably the right solution, but it has not worked. It has not worked. Next question, next comment. I appreciate it. Looks like we may be finished. Terry, thank you.
I'm listening to my internal dialogue, or my monologue to myself. And one of my first responses is, John, your perspective is unrealistic. But then the next thing that I hear is what I'm saying is following Christ in the way of Jesus is unrealistic. So then I get this turmoil inside, and I'm thinking, there is a jihad going on. I say too, I grew up here. I've been breathing the air of the culture so long. It's hard for me to get my head around this.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's
Very,
the
very.
challenge I'm finding is finding my, be it through this author or somewhere else, how do I get my head and my heart around this? And then from the inside think, okay, how do we apply this here? How do we apply that there? But this jihad going inside, it's a challenge.
Thank you very much, Terry. Really appreciate that comment. I think that he speaks for a lot of us, doesn't he? I hope he speaks for a lot of us, because the Jesus that asked his people to be followers says, I ask you to take up your cross and die. Die to empire, die to wanting to be first. Live to give yourself away to help other people. That's me. That's me. And if you can't get on board with that, probably not my follower. Sorry, not my follower. And I have come to the point, I'm 86 years old. I want to be a follower of Jesus. Oh, Lord, help me. I think the Jesus of Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, who said, if you want to be my follower, you're going to have to die. Die to yourself. Die to putting yourself first. Sure, you're loved. Sure, you're chosen. You're beloved. Thank you, Lord. Thank you. What do you want me to do with that? I receive it and give it away, he says. Give it away to the people who need it. Anybody, everybody. Give it away to the needy, the poor. Miss Walford. Speak.
I'd like to go back to your first comment that A.J. Muste came from Hope College and was within the Reformed Church for a long period of time. One church that he served was Middle Collegiate Church in New York City, one of our oldest churches. And it was A.J. Muste who withdrew from the Reformed Church because he felt that the Reformed Church just wasn't his most comfortable place. But the Reformed Church never withdrew from him. We still can say that at Hope College, he is honored today, even though maybe a period in the 60s and 70s when we'd rather not talk about Muste, we'd rather not bring up pacifism and so forth. But A.J. Muste was here and he developed intellectually here at Hope College. And he was not dismissed at Hope College. And pacifists were never dismissed with criticism by Reformed Church congregations in general, even though it was very hard to be a pacifist in World War II at all. I have an uncle who was a pacifist, a conscientious objector in World War II, and he was rejected by some people in his church, but not ultimately by his minister, who he respected very much. So, and my husband, John, was very opposed to the Vietnam War, sufficiently that he persuaded students at New Brunswick Seminary in 1968 to turn in their draft cards to the classes. They had an exemption. They didn't have to go to war. They didn't have to speak up at all, but that's what John was feeling guilty about, that if you oppose the war and you want to think this through and you want the Vietnam War brought forward, you don't just take your exemption and go be comfortable in the ministry and don't worry about it. So he steps forward, and boy, some of the professors were really mad at him. And when you put that on the ministers in the Brunswick classes, now they have to decide in their congregations, are you going to accept these draft cards being surrendered to you? Like you're going to participate in objection to the Vietnam War? But the classes by a vote took the cards and said, okay, we can tolerate this discussion. We never dismiss pacifism as something that's not Christian or you're out of here. We tolerate the conversation. And that's what happened here today in this group, because I don't think everybody would turn up to have this discussion unless in the United States, we tolerate the conversation. And in our democracy, we have limited power of the president to just declare a war, that's it. No, he has to have a process. And we have a State Department with so many experts that we can call in our own experts to help with these things for year after year after year. And one president after another has those powers. And we have a free press that can produce books like Barbara Tuchman's Guns of August, which presents the background of World War I, which was Muste's first testing ground. It's such an amazing book. If you read this thick book, you will know so much more about how world wars develop and what are all the things that feed into it. So I'm still proud of the fact that Muste's statue stands on the campus at Hope College, and there finally are the Muste lectures that take place every year that honor people who are going to come and give a presentation and publicize and recognize and honor what he brought to the table, even if we don't agree with some of Muste's points about what are the answers to war and where do we go with this. And you yourself, that in HASP, we bring this to the table. So bringing it to the table is something Americans can do when maybe other people don't always do that. Not that we're always perfect, and look how polarized we are on even something simple like getting rid of AK-15s. We have trouble even, dealing with that in Congress. So we're not sure how we feel about violence in that way. But the debate goes on, including at Hope College and in our Christian churches and congregations, I hope.
Friends, I want you to know that this is a Walford. She married a DeVelder, both names very highly regarded in the city of Holland and Hope College. Thank you.
Okay,
It's, and here's a comment from.
The AJ Muste lecture is October 21. Jim Wallace is speaking, who was the founder of Sojourners. Very well and respected, well-known international speaker. So I think that should be announced and we should all be there. 7 o'clock. on a Monday.
October 21,
October 21 at
7:30 in
I
Graves,
think it's at 7.
in where?
I think it's in Maz.
In the Moss.
Pretty
the-
sure.
The
Yeah.
Moss Center.
Yeah.
That's a good reminder by Kathy Beal. The AJ Musty lecture happens every year. And this year it's going to be Jim Wallace, who is highly regarded as an evangelical radical who wants to follow the kind of Jesus that I've articulated here today. Please attend. Keep alert to where it's going to be on Hope's campus. Thank you very much. I think we are at the point where we have to quit now. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, John.
Seven 30. Kathy, I've got a book to get back to you.